Dr. Craig, this certainly got my attention when I saw the name of this article. Has Christian apologetics failed? And it's written by Esther O'Reilly of the Young Fogey blog on Patheos. Let me go ahead and just give a spoiler here, and that is no, she says, but she thinks that it's misdefined quite often, and it's misconstrued to be something that it's not, and so on. This article has got a big picture of you and a big picture of Jordan Peterson. What I have noticed and what she talks about here is that a lot of people say, well, look at this. A Christian apologetic seems to be failing because two non-Christians these days are being used to bring people back into the fold or bringing people to Christ. A young Jewish man, Ben Shapiro, and Jordan Peterson, So what gives? Why is it that they're having all this success and actually pointing people to Christianity? That's what's so strange about it, Bill. And I have kind of noticed that phenomenon. It's almost like it's an incidental thing that it's gotten young men in particular,
yes,
the two of these guys, interested in spiritual things, interested in God, actually coming to Christ, some of them. And but both Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro use reason and logic, which is part and parcel of apologetics. So I don't know what the beef is here,
right. It is interesting to see how effective these folks are in reaching out to non-believers. It seems like perhaps non-believers are put off by people like myself who are Christian apologists and perhaps therefore biased, and they like the kind of open, exploratory approach of a Jordan Peterson better, perhaps. But I would distinguish, I think, Kevin, in this regard, between apologetics and evangelism. As I've explained in my book, Reasonable Faith, I think that apologetics is primarily a theoretical discipline. It's like physics or chemistry or history. It's a theoretical discipline that seeks to answer the question, what is the rational justification for Christian truth claims? By contrast, evangelism is the attempt to persuasively present the gospel so as to draw people into a relationship with Christ. And evangelism will use and draw upon apologetics in presenting and defending the gospel, but it's not the same thing as apologetics. Apologetics is a theoretical discipline. Evangelism is a practical form of outreach or ministry. So the fact that people like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson are more effective in drawing people toward Christ or the kingdom isn't a failure of the theoretical discipline, apologetics. If anything, it would be a failure of the practical discipline, evangelism. Namely, we're not doing our evangelism as effectively. We need to adopt, perhaps, a more invitational and exploratory approach like Jordan Peterson than a preaching and dogmatic approach.
Well, and again, as she points out in this article, that is also a matter of personality and style and things like that. And Bill, it's very humble of you to say that people would, they would bypass you and somebody like you because you're supposed to represent Christianity and so on. When Ben Shapiro has had you on his show and you've shared the podium, the platform with Jordan Peterson.
Yes, I have.
And so there's the influx of Christian influence between of these two people who are having this influence.
The odd thing, though, I find, Kevin, is that some people do find Jordan Peterson's approach more persuasive than the approach that I take, which is to give arguments and evidence in support of the truth of the Christian worldview. I I don't understand this, frankly. I have to admit I'm mystified. Why is it that Jordan Peterson telling young men to sit up straight and make their bed in the morning is something that's so appealing and arresting to them? It gives them, I guess, a sense of confidence and maleness that perhaps eventually leads them in the direction of Christian faith. But it seems to me at the end of the day, there's just no substance for asking the question, but is it true?
Yeah, that's true. And there's something very disarming about, I mean, his most popular videos, he's disheveled, rumpled, he hadn't had any sleep, and he looks like he's about to fall over. And he's just got this approach that only he can do because he's just kind of being himself. And that somehow provides a vehicle to get some of the truth of what he's saying in. But you wouldn't need to do that, Bill.
Well, I hope not, because I don't think
that's
I
not
could.
You. It's not you.
No, it's not me. That would be inauthentic. I feel that I'm just as authentic as Jordan Peterson, frankly, but we're different people.
That's right.
I'm not depressed in the way he struggles deeply with depression. Mm-hmm. I am blessed by the Lord with a very sanguine personality, so I'm just never depressed. And so I am upbeat.
Sure.
And I don't share these kinds of existential struggles, so I guess I did as a non-believer, and maybe that's the difference. Jordan Peterson is still in that pre-Christian phase of struggling with the meaning of life and existence, which I went through but came out on the other side.
Sure. Well, she goes on to say that, look, anybody who's complaining that Christian apologetics has failed, first of all, you're making a Christian apologetic this big monolith. I mean, what exactly do you mean by that, and what style or approach? Because there are various approaches. But she says, in light of the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, people seem to be defining success as, quote, inducing an openness to Christianity among atheists. And if you see a sudden influx of people, you're seeing all this fruit, and all these results, suddenly you see the trend, the phenomena. Well, then it's successful.
Now, I want to just underline the point I made before.
Okay.
I would say that would be a measure of the success of evangelism.
All right.
But that's not the measure of the success of apologetics. If apologetics is a theoretical discipline, the measure of the success of apologetics would be the formulation and defense of sound arguments for the existence of God and his decisive self-revelation in Jesus. That would be the measure of the success of apologetics. Has this theoretical discipline done an effective job? And by effective, I mean formulating sound, cogent arguments for Christian truth claims. And what she's talking about here is success in praxis, that is to say, evangelists' success in inducing openness among non-believers.
Yeah. In the middle of page 3, again, it says there's more to it than just counting noses as well. And again, that gets into evangelism. But how do we know how many people have stayed in the church or who have come to faith in Christ because their neighbor shared with them in evangelism and were there with some apologetics that helped that person come to faith in Christ? I mean,
absolutely. It has a tremendous effect in the lives of Christians. In my published work, I've named 3 applications of apologetics, or 3 reasons that the study of apologetics is important for Christians in Western society. The first one is shaping Western culture. It's really important that we maintain a cultural milieu in which the gospel can still be heard as an intellectually viable option. The second one would be the one that she's talking about here, namely winning unbelievers to Christ. Apologetics can be used in evangelism as a means of winning people. And then the third one would be strengthening believers. Apologetics can be a way of helping believers to deal with doubts, questions, and struggles that they have. And so, as she says, we shouldn't underestimate that third area of application, because it is hugely important that we do all we can to prevent defections from the Christian faith.
Sure. The bottom of page 3, she seems to be addressing people who are complaining that we don't see this massive herd of people flooding into the churches because they watch quoting here, because they watch William Lane Craig spank Christopher Hitchens on YouTube and they saw the light. It's true that apologetics has never catalyzed a clearly definable hotspot of renewed interest in church and Christianity on the scale of what we are currently observing with the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. People who are saying, well, apologetics is not producing this flood in here. We're saying, is that again confusing evangelism and apologetics?
Well, it is. It would be saying that I'm not as effective an evangelist as Jordan Peterson, in a sense, is. And while that may be true, I mean, he is a phenom. He is apparently the most publicly demanded public speaker in the world today, and is on international media channels all the time, very visible public figure. And nothing that I have done has that kind of visibility. But nevertheless, Kevin, as I think you know, every week we receive the most heartwarming emails from people who have watched a YouTube video or read a book and who have come to faith in Christ, or who have come back to faith in Christ after years away from him because of the arguments and evidence that are offered. So I'm tremendously gratified by the way the Lord has seen fit to use our ministry, even if it isn't as visible and splashy as the Jordan Peterson phenomenon.
Yeah. And she says here in the middle of page 4 that anybody who says apologetics never converted anybody just is not even looking. He said, because she says, I know for a fact that these quiet, unsung, $1 apologists every day are interacting online, friends and neighbors, friends, and in forums, using apologetics in their evangelism. And that's one of the main fruits of the Apologetics Renaissance that is taking place. I agree with her. I'm glad to see this happening. I see good apologetics and philosophy, Bill, in the comment sections. And I don't even feel pressure to go in there and put anything myself, because 15 people did it ahead of me on some of the things that I say. I'd like to fire off an answer. A lot of I feel, we're covered here. So that's some real fruit right there, that you see this intellectual grounding and this apologetics renaissance as people are interacting, today.
Right.
So, and she says this may not have the eye-catching op-eds and splashy pieces of investigative journalism, but it's going on, and it's happening. And, Bill, I never hear apologetics doesn't work. I mean, I've never had anybody tell me that or write me that or anything. I know one guy, we did a podcast on his book a while back. He wrote a book that, where apologetics doesn't work or something like that. It was an apologetic against apologetics, the whole thing. But other than that, I see people just electrified in their faith.
I do too. I see Christians strengthened and encouraged in their faith, and then also we see these non-believers coming to faith in Christ because they've heard a robust defense of the truth of the Christian faith.
Okay. She says in the middle of page 5, kind of brings it back to you, Bill. She says, all of that being said, there's still people, some of whom walked away from the church and are now fans of Jordan Peterson, who will say, quote, William Lane Craig didn't do it for me. And he is a formidable debater, no question, but not everyone has walked away convinced. Why not? And then she answers and says, well, let's be honest. It's ridiculously easy to generate a long list of objections to Christianity. It takes ignorance 10 seconds to ask a question that requires careful scholarship 10 pages to answer carefully. Some will automatically take such thoroughness as a sign that the lady doth protest too much. Of course, a brief response will be waved away as embarrassingly insufficient. For some skeptics, this truly is a heads I win, tails you lose affair. What she says is that people who have a platform like William Lane Craig, like yourself, can't get to everybody. They can't come over and have coffee with you. You can't do that, Bill. You can't spread yourself that thin. You can only do that on occasion. And so when you have doubts, get with some trusted friends, get with your church community and things like that, rather than depend on the big speakers to be that for you.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Kevin. I think that's absolutely right. I often get messages through the Facebook page or other social media asking for my pastoral advice on something. And I often will tell these people, you need to speak to someone in person about this, a trusted pastor or a trusted Christian friend, because these are not the sort of things that are going to be solved through interaction on social media.
Yeah. You might want to clear up at the bottom of page 5 because there seems to be this belief, Bill, that you adopt a minimalist approach. She says that the fact that apologists like Craig deliberately adopt a minimalist approach doesn't always aid matters here. I'm not sure what she means by that because you don't do the minimal facts thing. You're going to have to be brief in a debate setting, but I'm not sure if you can be labeled by that.
I suspect that what she means here is that I tend to adopt a case for what C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity that requires that you prove the existence of God and God's decisive self-revelation in Jesus. And I think that if you've got those two things in hand, then you should become a Christian. And you don't need to know that the Bible is inspired or inerrant or all of these other sorts of doctrines. If you believe that God exists and he's revealed himself decisively in Jesus and has shown this by raising him from the dead, that's sufficient for a Christian commitment. So it's minimalist in that sense, but I'm surprised when she goes on to say that people like Bart Ehrman require a broader set of tools than many apologists have in their toolkit to refute fully. And so I take it that what she means there is Ehrman's attacks upon the reliability of the Gospels and the manuscript evidence of the New Testament and so forth requires a more fulsome response. Well, I do think that in order to answer those arguments, you need a fuller response, but you do not need to answer those arguments in order to justify becoming a Christian. And that's the point that I want to make. Those concerns that Ehrman makes about the manuscript evidence and the copyists' errors and contradictions in the Gospels, those are all in-house disputes among Christians. So long as you're able to establish that God exists and that he raised Jesus from the dead, then you should become a Christian. And that's all you need to answer Ehrman's attack upon the truth of Christianity. The rest then can be dealt with later.
Finally, Bill, she relates the story of a young man that she calls Jay. And he had apparently, according to the article, rejected his faith, started reading all the internet infidel types, and then reading Michael Shermer, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Richard Carrier. Had this new commitment to reason and logic and everything, and started arguing for atheism. And then she writes, quoting, "It was around this time that he found Peterson's appearance with William Lane Craig in a dialogue titled, 'Is There Meaning to Life?' He had written Craig off before, quoting, mostly because he was a Christian fundamentalist who soundly defeated every secular opponent he faced, which was pretty annoying," unquote. But now he listened with fresh ears. Craig's comments didn't have Peterson's drive and unpolished passion, but they made sense. They felt grounded.
Yeah, I have heard this again and again, Kevin, that people who have written me off at first and dismissed me, then after some time and different things in their life have changed, come back again to look at it a second time, and they do hear it with fresh ears. It's as though they're hearing it now, really, for the first time, because they're no longer so dismissive and having their ears plugged. And so it's really gratifying, I think, to see that Jordan Peterson helped to awaken this fellow to his need, to point him in the direction. But then, when he looked at the dialogue again, he could hear it with fresh ears, and the arguments began to make sense. That's really gratifying.